It's the way to go. Eat a fig, not a pig, let your kindness show. If it's your wig or a jig or a swig, do you dig? Big. It's the way to go. It's Big Fat Vegan Radio.
When something's fat, there's a lot to show. It's gotta be fat to help the movement grow. Making fat loud chat that won't be flat. It's that. And here's our show. It's Big Fat Vegan Radio.
I just got that vegan glow, like a drag queen calling Patrick Goudreau. I'm a YouTube vegan cooking up good eating. Veganism makes me glow. It's Big Fat Vegan Radio.
All right, vegans, all together now. When something's fat, there's a lot to show. It's gotta be fat to help the movement grow. Making fat loud chat that won't be flat. It's that.
It's the way to go.
It's Big Fat Vegan Radio.
Hey everyone, welcome to Big Fat Vegan Radio. We are podcasting from East Coast to West Coast to discuss veganism in all of its glory. I am Ben Strothman, otherwise known as Honey LeBronx, everyone's favorite vegan drag queen. And I'm here today without Laura Yaz, my co-host, vegan writer, and entertainment know-it-all. I am doing an interview episode today, and I'll tell you more about that in just a moment. You can check us out on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube by searching for Big Fat Vegan Radio. And you can follow along with our show notes at bigfatveganradio.com. Let me start by apologizing for the echo and for the little bit of outside background noise you're hearing. If I pause, you can hear a siren. You can probably hear that, right? I have moved. I'm in my new apartment. I now reside in Hell's Kitchen. And it's quite noisy where I am. It's not like my quiet old apartment where I had pretty good sound insulation. Here, you're just, you're hearing everything on the street. Sirens, ambulances. And not to mention, I live on 10th Avenue now. So I literally, sitting here at my computer looking out the window, I am seeing horse-drawn carriages going right by from my bedroom window. It's very disturbing. So, I want to tell you a bit about today's interview. Big Fat Vegan Radio listener Sara Andrews in my home state of Wisconsin brought this issue to my attention. P.S. Fun fact, she also brought to my attention the idea of doing the CeeLo Green Tofu parody song. So, Sarah, thank you for that gem of an idea, and thank you also for suggesting today's interview. Basically, we get into it, so I'm not going to set it up too much. But I basically invited onto the show Rick Bogle and Murry Cohen to talk about vivisection, specifically at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and what's going on there with primate research and their current maternal detachment experimentations, which are pretty horrific and traumatic. So yeah, this is going to be an awesome episode. It's going to be a little bit hard to listen to at some points, just given the nature of what we're discussing. But I hope that it leaves you with some hope. And I hope that after listening to this, you will be moved to take action. There are going to be some actions that you can take that we list in the show notes, as well as discussed in the podcast. So, with that said, I would love to welcome Rick Bogle and Murry Cohen to Big Fat Vegan Radio. Murry Cohen and Rick Bogle, welcome to Big Fat Vegan Radio.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much, you guys. This issue came to my attention partly through my good friend Sara Andrews, who I know you guys have been in communication with out in Madison, Wisconsin. But I would say first, I really became aware of this issue. You know, as our listeners know, I am a Wisconsin native. I live in New York now, but I'm originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I became aware of this when I saw a YouTube video with the actor James Cromwell protesting a board meeting at UW-Madison because they are huge proponents of vivisection. So could you guys tell me a bit about UW-Madison and the practices that are going on there?
Rick, why don't you start, since you've been involved in this for so long and actually live there?
Sure. So the University of Wisconsin has one of the larger animal research programs around the country. There's a handful of large universities like them. The university does research on just about every sort of animal you can imagine. They're the home of the Wisconsin National Primate Research Center, one of 8 federally funded facilities around the country that raises monkeys and experiments on them. They raise monkeys and sell them to other labs around the country. They've had all sorts of problems. They were, I don't know if you know, but a few years ago they had 3 colonies of monkeys at the zoo. They were caught secretly selling those monkeys around the country after promising over an 8-year period in 4 written agreements with the county that they wouldn't do that. So that was quite the scandal. They've been involved in a number of scandals. They've paid off veterinarians who raised concerns about the treatment of the animals in the labs. They've been the subject of a number of campaigns, particularly with the maternal deprivation earlier, sort of kicked off things. At one time, when there were about 4,000 people at Library Mall that were protesting the use of monkeys at the Primate Center. They have a long history of stuff like that. I'm not sure exactly what more you want to hear, but if you ask specific details, I can probably answer those for you. Sure.
Well, specifically, what I'd love to know is, when I became aware of this, they were testing on cats. If people who are listening want to know more, if they Google or YouTube, Double Trouble was the name of a cat who they were experimenting on. It's too awful even for me to go into what they were doing. But
let me say one thing about that.
Yes.
PETA found out that they had videotaped and taken photographs of the cats in the Tom Yin lab. Tom Yin studies sound location. So what he does is he deafens cats and then attaches cochlear implants to them and tries to understand how the brain of a cat can figure out what direction sound is coming from. They found out that these photographs were taken by the lab. They asked for them. The university refused to release them, and they ended up in court for about a 3-year period. PETA discovered that the university had been lying about the confidentiality statements, that they said that they couldn't release them because they would show these secret things that were in the process of being developed. And it turned out that the company that developed them also had a grant from the NIH saying that they had to release any information they got. It was an Australian company as soon as they discovered it. So there was never an issue of confidentiality, and
Wow.
the university had the photographs hidden for a 3-year period. This is very similar to, we discovered that Ned Kalin, who we'll talk about in a moment, had taken photographs or had done video of monkeys being frightened in his lab. We asked for those, a copy of that video, not understanding actually what we were asking for, and we got a number of people asking for it. Every time they denied. They said that they weren't subject to the Open Records, the Freedom of Information Act, or state open records laws. We got an attorney involved. They told her to go to hell, essentially. And finally, we got Bill Leaders, who was at the time the news director of the Isthmus newspaper here in Madison, and also happened to be the president of the local or of the state Freedom of Information group. I can't remember the name of them. And as soon as he asked for them, they destroyed them. They shredded them. It turns out that we did get a brief summary of what they shredded, and they shredded 628 videotapes over a 15-year period of a whole cacophony of experiments on monkeys. And so they have a history of trying to keep things hidden. They have a history of destroying documents and records when they find out that they're going to probably have to give them. And with the Tom Yin case, after they were forced to give the photographs to to PETA, which then publicized them, and as you were alarmed, many people found them to be hideous. Then they went ahead and put them in some of the videos up, some of the cleaner videos up on their website, and some photographs, and say, see, we're totally open and transparent.
Wow, how sneaky.
So that's Tanya, and those are the photographs you were talking about as far as the cat with the head cap.
Yeah. So
and that, I think, is what drew Cromwell, the actor, into his civil disobedience activities.
Well, for people who haven't heard of that and aren't familiar, can you tell them a bit more about James Cromwell's involvement, and perhaps, if we have time, a bit more about PETA's involvement in bringing this to light? Specifically, I always try to look at our podcast here from the point of view of, like, from the average man, how one person can make a change in the world. I would be totally baffled at, like, how did PETA know to even go in and find out the legality of what they were doing and whether or not they did have a confidentiality clause. Like, who is out there working on that?
That's people like Murray and me and staff at PETA. That much of this information is available online as far as what's being done. The National Institutes of Health has a website called Reporter. It includes most of the funded studies by the National Institutes of Health, which is the largest funder of the use of experiments on animals in the world. There's abstracts for all of the studies. You can see who's doing what. Then there's a website also run by the National Institutes of Health called PubMed, which gives you access to many journal articles where you can find some detail of what's going on. You can also do open records requests for the actual protocols, the approved procedures that they're going to use in the experiments, and you can start asking for other things through state open records laws and public records laws, federal laws. And so it's interested people that are consumed by the thought that animals are being held someplace and being hurt on a regular daily basis, that have all sorts of terrible things being done to them, that have no hope of escape, have no control, and that the people that are doing it are frequently cited for problems in their laboratories, for poor care. We read and we find out that animals are dying from lack of water, that are getting trapped in cage mechanisms and killed, or here at the University of Wisconsin, they've been put through cage washers. People haven't even looked in the cages before they put them into basically a giant dishwasher that has these super hot jets of chemicals to decontaminate everything and sterilize it. And it just goes on and on. It's impossible to start to get connected with this movement and not just be alarmed by the number of violations that you see, the details, even if it's legal, the things that they're doing to them, which are so horrible, just like what's going on here with the maternal deprivation stuff right now in the Kalin lab. Kalin's been frightening monkeys, destroying parts of their brains, then frightening them again, young monkeys, for almost 20 years. And it just goes on, and the animals are trapped. They have no way out, and there's nobody with a concern for them who's looking over the scientists' shoulders and trying to do something about it, other than the people that are trying to look through very, very cloudy glass, people like me that are trying to use the databases and the published papers and piece together what's going on.
Despite the attempts of all of these laboratories to keep things secret, to keep taxpayers ignorant, to withhold what they're doing from the general public, because they know the general public would be aghast if they knew. There are means of finding out, but it takes highly motivated people like Rick and his colleagues in Madison, plus the few physicians out there like me who are willing to analyze these things scientifically and medically. For example, there's a group called SANE, S-A-E-N, Stop Animal Exploitation Now, which uses the Freedom of Information Act to get information about what is going on in laboratories. And whenever it does, it finds out horrible conditions of animal welfare. Forget about whether or not animals should or shouldn't be used for experimentation as animal models to try and improve human health. That's a different question. I'm obviously opposed to that, but that's a different question. But given their own premises that animals are useful, they should at least take care of the animals so that the subjects that they're getting data from are healthy, but they don't. So SANE, through many, many FOIA, Freedom of Information Act requests, have found just about every time they register one, they find at the University of Wisconsin, University of Florida, at Lovelace Institute, UCLA, over and over again, horrible, horrible conditions in the laboratories. The animals, which are supposed to be treated properly in order to get data from them to help human beings, are treated horribly. They're starving. They're dying of thirst. They're dying of heat prostration. They're going into cage cleaners while they're in the cage, as Rick said, over and over again. So if you have motivated people like myself and Rick and many, 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 many others who just can't fathom what is going on, are just disgusted and horrified by it, there are things that one can do, and there are means that one can utilize.
Well, so I would love to ask you guys specifically, in addition to Double Trouble, the cat that they're experimenting on, specifically there is a big focus right now at the University of Madison on primate testing, and they're studying maternal deprivation. So could you guys tell me a bit about specifically what that looks like, what they're testing, and I guess from their point of view, like what they're trying to discover, or what good they're trying to affect in the world, and then whether we think that's effective or not.
Well, let me start, and then Rick can sort of bring it into the present. It's not the University of Madison. It's the University of Wisconsin at Madison.
Yes.
And
I went to UW Milwaukee for one whole semester.
Yes.
So whenever I say UWM or UW, University of Wisconsin, people are like, "Oh, you went to Madison?" I'm like, no, I went to Milwaukee for one semester, and then I dropped out to become a personal banker. But at any rate, yeah. So University of Wisconsin at Madison.
Madison. One of the reasons why it is in the forefront of monkey research has to do with the fact that the infamous physiological psychologist Harry Harlow, in the 50s and 60s, started his maternal deprivation studies there. So the University of Wisconsin at Madison became known, and for that they named their laboratory the Harlow Laboratory. There's a primate center there in Madison, one of the 7 or 8 in the country. Harvard's is being shut down next year. It claims because of a funding problem, so there'll be one fewer primate center. But the point is that the University of Wisconsin at Madison has been in the monkey business for a long time, with scandal after scandal. The Willis Zoo monkey scandal from 1996 that Rick will probably tell you about. So there's a long tradition there of using monkeys as experimental models to gain data to improve human health. The point is that everything that Harlow did there and has become famous for had already been done by clinical psychiatrists like Spitz and Bowlby and Donald Winnicott. And so he basically repeated in monkeys what had already been known in humans. Unfortunately, our scientific community to this day, some of them still believe that it is not to be believed, whatever data you have is not to be taken seriously, unless you can prove it in animals. And that notion is less adhered to these days, but it was very prominent back in the 50s and 60s when Harlow was working. So he took advantage of it and demonstrated in monkeys, by abusing them and exposing them to pits of despair, to use his word, and rape racks, to use his word, he proved that the same deleterious effects of maternal deprivation in humans would apply to monkeys. And he developed a cottage industry there. He published paper after paper. He developed a lot of alliance. He had students there who to this day are still doing maternal deprivation experiments. So this was one of the University of Wisconsin-Madison's claim to fame. It started half a century ago with Harlow, and unfortunately it's still going on to this day. And Rick can bring it into the present.
Thank you.
So the research that's underway today is the scientist that's doing it his name is Ned Kaelin. He's an MD. He's the chair of the Department of Psychiatry at the School of Medicine and Public Health. As I told you earlier, he's been studying fear in young monkeys for about 20 years. In this new study, what he's doing is he believes that if he can compare the brains of infant male rhesus monkeys who have had lived a life filled with early adversity and compare their brains with male rhesus monkeys who've not experienced as much adversity, that he'll discover new genetic and molecular pathways in their brains that are associated with the development of the stress and the problems associated with that he believes are associated with early adversity that he says lead to later onsets of adult depression that is intractable. And Murry can certainly talk about this, being a psychiatrist. So that's what he's doing. He's taking 20 baby monkeys, male rhesus monkeys are well known to be to suffer from much more stress as a response to being raised in a laboratory condition. So he's taking these. Actually, there's 40 male rhesus monkeys. There's 20 in the group that are going to be left with their mother for 6 months, and then moved to a cage with another infant male rhesus monkey who was also raised with his mother. And so those 20 monkeys are going to be left to live a normal sort of laboratory life for a year or year and a half. And then the 20 monkeys that he's going to use in his experimental group, he's taking away from their mothers the day that they're born. They're going to be individually housed. They're going to be essentially socially isolated for the first 3 to 6 weeks, which we know is about as stressful a thing as you can possibly do to an infant rhesus monkey. They have an innate, strong, overwhelming desire to cling, to hold on, and which makes sense because their mothers are scampering around, running through the trees, jumping this way and that. And if an infant monkey doesn't hang on, he's going to end up on the ground and be dead. So this is one of the most fundamental sort of behaviors that an infant monkey has. Nothing at all like a human, of course, but the baby monkeys have to cling on. So those monkeys are going to be isolated. They're going to be left that way for between 3 and 4 weeks, or 3 to 6 weeks. At the end of that period, they're going to be paired with another male infant monkey who was also treated the same way, was taken away from his mother. And they're going to be kept together in that pair for about 6 months, at which time they'll be placed with another monkey. They'll disrupt that bond that will have formed. They're doing that to model the fact that the infant monkey that's living with its mother is going to be taken from the mother at 6 months. That's the standard in this particular at the primate center, to take monkeys from their mothers at 6 months. So they'll do that to try to match that up. So then, while these 2 male monkeys that have been isolated from their mothers originally, periodically during their life, they're going to take them and they're going to do a variety of things to them. They're going to expose them to monkeys that they've not seen before. Mm-hmm. They're going to expose them to people that come in and stare at them. They're going to expose them to novel environments, place them in an open room remember that they've always been in a small box. They're going to put them alone in these places. They're going to...
all of these things are horribly traumatic to the baby monkeys.
And that's why they're doing them. And they're going to expose them. They're going to show them a snake, which is really sort of a weird thing. And then periodically they're going to do spinal taps. They're going to do skin biopsies. They're going to be anesthetizing them and putting them into different brain scanners. They're going to do MRIs on them. So all of these things that are going to be done to them are going to be done repeatedly and with the intent, as far as the behavioral things, to frighten them, to cause them increased anxiety. And then once all of that's done, then they'll kill those monkeys. They'll kill the monkeys that were left with their mothers and that were paired with other monkeys who were left with their mothers, and then they'll compare their brains. In past work that's somewhat similar to this in Kalen's lab, it looks as if their primary focus is trying to identify genetic precursors to molecular pathways that they can patent. So they're trying to find these little gene sequences that seem to be precursors to later things that go on in mental development, in brain development, that they can patent. He already owns it.
And let me just add, until some time ago, there was no such thing as gene patenting. And when the concept first came out, many of us thought it was worse than insane, but overtly dangerous. And sure enough, it turned out that way, because now you can actually own patents of gene sequences, which is really crazy to begin with. But it does allow you to potentially make a lot of money by owning these sequences, if these sequences are converted into drugs, and the drug is determined to be useful for this or that, whether or not it is or it isn't. Many drugs we have today have been used for years and years, and they're not useful, and they're actually harmful. But they've made $3, $4, $5 billion for the drug companies. So that if a drug can be developed from these patented gene sequences, there is a huge amount of money to be made by the drug company, by Kalin, by the university, by the Kalin groupies, by everybody involved in this entire thing.
So the University of Wisconsin's main arm in this, as far as the gene patenting and patents on everything that you can imagine, is the Wisconsin the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, or WARF, WARF. And there's a big drive at the university. And if you read the paper, I mean, you'll periodically. In fact, yesterday's paper, I saw an article about WARF and its patents on something that was. So they essentially have a mall. Think of it this way: they have a shopping mall, and they rent out spaces for all of the different people that work there. And those people apply for grants from the federal government. They come into the mall. The people take them. The university is allowed to skim off a percentage of that, and the percentage varies, but we'll just say off the top 25 to 30%. That goes in the general fund. And then all of these people are doing their research. If they make an important discovery, WARF, or the university, joins in a partnership with them, and they patent that. And then the university will own a portion of that patent, and the researcher will own a portion. And
that means that if a drug is developed from this, a certain percentage of the profits of that drug go to the owners of the patent. So the university, Kalin, and other researchers have the potential to make huge amounts of money from this.
That's right. In fact, one of the earliest things that led to this whole idea about the university being involved in this was the development of Coumadin as a blood thinner. It was used in rat poison. And
right.
It's called warfarin, in fact. Warfarin comes from the name Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation.
Oh wow!
And it was one of their first patents on a drug, and they can, as far as I don't know how long the patent lasts, but I'm sure they made a lot of money on warfarin, which had already been out as a rat poison, but they anyway.
So let me ask you guys. For someone out there who might hear about these tests and think, oh, well, this maybe this could lead to a cure for depression, or why is this not a good idea in your opinion, as it relates to humans? I mean, as I understand it, just about you name just about any animal, and we are all more genetically similar to each other. Even like I saw some website that shows like. A human and a rat share this percentage of DNA. A human and a snail share this percentage of DNA, and it's a surprisingly large percent. We are more similar than dissimilar, but the slightest differences in our DNA makes for huge changes. I mean, for example, we're very similar to a dog, but we don't die if we eat chocolate. So I mean, why would you say that these tests on rhesus monkeys are or are not effective in human studies?
I'll let Murray answer some of that, but let me first jump in and say that Kalin's claim in his proposal and in the letters that he's written to people, he says that that he's going to come up with a drug. He thinks that his research is going to lead to a drug that will be able to prevent or cure the effects of poor parenting. Poor parenting, he says, is sexual abuse, physical abuse, neglect, every kind of poor parenting thing you can imagine. And so if we can identify children that are, say, from a poor black home who might not be treated just right because of all of the pressures that are on the family, if we can just give them this drug early on, then we're not going to have to worry anymore about that child developing depression later in life. That's his sort of focus here. And you're right as far as the small, tiny differences in genetics being a problem. All genomes are complex systems, and we know that complex systems aren't good models of each other. So that's why you can get a drug and feel some sort of benefit from it. I might get the same drug and not have any benefit at all because of the very small differences in our individual genomes. Murry can talk more about this, though. Murry, should we be injecting children with a drug or giving them oral drugs when they're a year old if we think that they're in an at-risk population?
Well, if you believe in the Nazi version of eugenics, yes, we should. Absolutely. But we don't believe in that. We don't believe in treating a genotype. We believe in treating a phenotype, and that's only if the phenotype causes, which is the behavioral manifestation. If it causes symptoms and if it leads to dysfunction, then we treat it. We don't do genetic testing and treat genotypes. Because, number one, we don't know what that genotype is going to evolve into. Number two, even if it does evolve into the so-called anxious temperament that Kalin and other people talk about, we don't know if that anxious temperament is going to be a good thing or a bad thing. It could be a good thing in the sense that it protects you from noxious stimuli because you're sufficiently anxious to avoid danger, or it could be a bad thing in that it would evolve into an anxiety disorder. We don't know that, which is why eugenics is wrong, which is why you don't treat genotypes. You treat behavior, and only if that behavior is disruptive, dysfunctional, what we call ego-dystonic, disagreeable to the person, or leads to dysfunction. So what Kalin is doing smacks of 1984, Brave New World. It's Orwellian in its way. As far as genetic proclivities, no animal is closer to us than the chimpanzee. They say 98.6% the same genetically, and yet look how different we are. 98.6%, and yet, who would date a chimpanzee? We all love them as fellow human beings, but we don't love them as far as objects of romantic love because they're very, very different than we are. And in fact, except for maybe hepatitis C research, use of chimpanzees has failed in just about everything else, including AIDS research, cancer research, infectious disease research, except for hepatitis C. On and on, to the point now where NIH has essentially released the chimpanzees from experimentation. And this is the animal closest to us. Now, if chimpanzees have been found to be essentially worthless, in terms of serving as an animal model, then how can we use animals that are even more distant from us genetically, like monkeys, certainly like dogs, certainly like rats and mice and hamsters and gerbils? How can we use them as animal models? The answer is we can't, but we do. Why do we? Because using them is a big business. Animal experimentation is a big business. It has less to do with human health and more to do with grantsmanship, money, and professional advancement.
I have to make an aside here, and this is very out of left field, but if anyone listening has ever seen the Kids in the Hall movie Brain Candy, have either of you guys seen this film?
No.
Okay. If you remember the Kids in the Hall, they're a Canadian sketch comedy group, had a TV show produced by Lauren Michaels, back in the 80s and 90s. They did a movie called Brain Candy, which literally is about this same kind of a mall that you described, where every single little pop-up shop, they have their own little laboratory, and because they're cracking down on funding for all of the scientists they employ, literally the person at the top is sending people around to be like, hey, what are you guys working on? What are you studying? And they're trimming all the fat, deciding who to fund, who not to fund. And the main characters that they're focusing on are literally trying to come up with a pill for people who have had like past trauma to like make them forever happy and to pull them. It's like exactly what you guys are describing. And the entire reason they're trying to force this drug through isn't because it's effective, because it turns out later in the film it's not. It's because they don't want to have their funding pulled. I can't believe such a ridiculous film is actually playing out in real life.
And, you know, even though the pill is not an answer to most things in medicine, including cardiovascular disease, cancer, psychiatric disease, and on and on and on and on. That's where the money lies. The money lies in developing a pill, a blockbuster pill, that a drug company can make huge amounts of profits on while it still has its patent, and patents last for as long as 10, 11, 12 years, during which time you can make billions and billions of dollars. But most often, this is not the right approach to these complex medical and behavioral problems, but that is where the money lies. So a lot of the animal research, including addiction research that's going on at UCLA and maternal deprivation that's going on in Maryland through NIH and certainly in Madison, these are all designed to develop drugs, pills. And the answer to the ravages of maternal deprivation, the answer is not a pill. The answer is a complex psychosocial treatment modality, which we already have. We know all about that. We know how to use it. But the point is nobody can afford it because they tend to be expensive. They tend to be labor-intensive. Managed care companies won't pay for them. So people who have already experienced the ravages of maternal deprivation with post-traumatic stress disorders, attachment disorders, cannot get the treatment they need because there's no money out there. But there is money to go to Kaelin and to other maternal deprivation people. NIH doles out $12 billion a year, almost half of which goes for animal research. There's enough money there to support animal experimenters to continue research and develop additional treatments that nobody else will be able to afford.
I mean, my God, I've been through plenty in my life, and I'm not looking for a pill to make it all better. I'm taking the adversity of my life, and I'm using that to better myself. I'm using that to learn and adapt and grow. I mean, I literally know a woman who suffered, rape and incest and abuse all of her life. Her mother once pushed her out of a moving vehicle. And this woman today is a well-adjusted person, has a good relationship with her mother, has forgiven her, and none of it came as a result of a pill. This is absolutely the wrong approach, and it doesn't sound to me like it's motivated by any genuine concern to better mankind, because if that were the genuine concern, these people would be taking up, as you guys are, for a cause and directing this funding to actually helping people get the help that they need.
That is very true. Unfortunately, as a practicing physician, I can say that drugs and pills are, for the most part, what the practice of medicine is all about.
Oh, sure.
It's called allopathic medicine. That eliminates homeopathic medicine, naturopathic medicine, and other forms of non-pill-oriented medicine. And that's bad enough. Contributing to that problem is vivisection or animal experimentation. Why? Because it's very reductionistic, which means that they try to find some underlying physiological process, a genotype or a gene sequence, and then address the treatment toward that rather than looking at it holistically, looking at it as a psychosocial thing, a developmental thing, nurturing, family influences, etc., and so forth. So one of the major criticisms of modern medicine is that it's pill and drug oriented, and animal experimentation contributes to that.
I think it's important to let's keep in mind that at least I'm not saying that all drugs are bad, and there are people that apparently received great benefit from a number of drugs, particularly even in areas of psychiatric illness.
No question about that. As a practicing psychiatrist, I prescribe many, many times every single day. I believe in medications, even though a lot of the ones we use, we don't understand exactly how they work, but they seem to work and they seem to have low toxicities. So I am a practitioner of allopathic medicine, and I use medications when it seems indicated. I'm just saying that for drugs and chemicals to capture the entire practice of medicine, the entire concept of medicine, is wrong. There are approaches that you can extrapolate from other forms of medicine, homeopathic medicine, naturopathic medicine, that are equally as effective as the chemical approach of allopathic medicine, and which I believe in. I happen to believe in all of those, but I certainly believe in medications and pills. But what I'm saying is that vivisection unnecessarily emphasizes that single emphasis on pills and drugs.
I agree with Dr. Cohen. I think it's important also to note that in Kalen's case, this is really different. This is him saying that I'm trying to develop a drug for children, very young children, who are in at-risk situations. Not children the woman, for instance, the woman that you said was pushed out of the car and had all of these problems, nobody understands really why two people can go through very similar events. One person can come away with it, learned a lot, and seems well adjusted in spite of the terrible things that were done to them or the experiences they had. Other people seem to be really impacted in a terrible way. But in the case of these children that Kalen says he's targeting, we don't know which one of them are going to be a child who develops a problem later on, or a child who grows up and talks about it in his comic routine. We don't know how those kids are going to react. And so Kalen's idea is that we'll identify this at-risk group and we'll just treat them just across the board. I'm sorry, we'll look a little chart, and let's see, your income, your parents' income is this. Oh, you come from a broken family. You have these problems. Maybe your parents were immigrants. Who knows what their list of checkoff things will be to define this at-risk group? And then we'll bring them in and we'll give them the drug. And hopefully we won't even have to worry about the child abuse that then occurs or the lack of food or whatever the heck it is. I think people that are really alarmed with this from the human point of view, as opposed to the animal suffering point of view, I think that they should be really looking carefully at the way that the money's being spent. Surely that some of these families, the children, could be much better served by having more support for the family, by having people really trying to take care of the kids, to do some early interventions, if in fact there even is a problem. I think that just because you're poor and come from a broken home doesn't mean that you're going to have any problems at all. You might have a wonderful family life, but maybe you're in the at-risk group and we should just treat you anyway.
This has just got me thinking about just the practice of psychiatry and how it is actually out on the streets. I mean, many years ago, when I first was lucky enough to have health insurance for a little while, I went to a psychiatrist I would say I think I have attention deficit disorder, or at least I've been told, and it feels like I do. But hang on, there's someone outside. There's a squirrel. No, I'm just kidding. It's a bad joke. I went to the psychiatrist to treat it, and it's like everything that he attempted to help me with or do was just in the form of a pill. There was absolutely no treatment. There was absolutely no understanding of attention deficit. There was no, as I understand, an attention deficit diagnosis is a really complex procedure, but none of that actually took place. And then nothing that we did worked. Fast forward to present day, when I have health insurance again. So I went to a psychiatrist. I'm like, hey, I want to address my attention deficit. Here's what I've tried in the past. None of these medications worked. She tried something new for me. I think it was Strattera. And and the entire, I would assume of any, even a doctor's appointment that I have is somewhere between, is maybe about 20 minutes, which in my opinion is not long enough. When I'm talking to my doctor about, well, here's what I need to talk to you about today, I can see him looking at the clock. There's someone out in the hallway who knocks on the door to let him know that his time is almost up. And I haven't even got to ask any of my questions yet. That's a 20-minute appointment with my doctor. When I met with this psychiatrist, every single time I met with her, the appointments were at most 5 minutes long. She runs down a list of questions and then wrote me a prescription. And when I finally came back to her, I tried this prescription for a while, and I finally came back and I'm like, I feel absolutely no difference on this medication or off. It's done nothing for my attention deficit. And she looked at me and she just shrugged and she's like, all right, well then we just won't prescribe it for you. And I'm like, okay, well now what do we do? And she's like, well, that's it. I mean, that's it. That's all she had for me was we either prescribe you something or we don't. And I'm like, wait, hang on. What about cognitive therapy? What about referring me to a therapist who specializes? She literally just handed me a photocopied list of names, and she's like, I don't know, maybe you could go through here and call someone and see if anyone has experience with that. And I'm like, you can't even steer me in the right direction. She's like, that's not what I do. It's not what she does.
And, there are a lot of things contributing to that. Corporate takeovers of medicine, managed care plans, big pharma sending reps to the office pushing pills. I'm not trying to reduce it to one thing, but animal experimentation contributes to this particular problem in the practice of medicine. Why? You can't find psychosocial approaches. You can't develop good methodology of taking a history in an animal lab. Try taking a history from a rhesus monkey. How many times do you date, et cetera, and so forth. You can't do family therapy. You can't do couples therapy. You can't do rehab. You can't do anything. All you can do is give them chemicals because it's a reductionistic science. And that reductionism, which takes place in the animal experimentation lab, gets transferred into the doctor's office. And that's one way, one of the many ways in which animal experimentation works against the proper practice of medicine.
And yet there's still, if you talk to people, when I tell people out in the street that I'm vegan, once they wrap their heads around the idea that I don't eat animals, then of course they ask about my shoes, then of course they ask about, fashion or clothing or entertainment. But people seem to cling to this idea that without animal testing, we're screwed, that is an absolute necessary evil. Is this in any way necessary? I mean, is animal testing, this day and age, leading us to anything in the way of cures for our ills or better living?
Not that I'm aware of.
Not that I'm aware of either.
Yeah.
I do know that the opposite is true. Two of the major medications in psychiatry today are Abilify and Cymbalta, which is now available generically as duloxetine. And it turns out that in the animal studies, these two compounds, which have helped a lot of people, I've prescribed them thousands of times. I'm great believers in them. But if the animal data would have been believed, they never would have been released, because the bioavailability in the animal studies of both of these chemicals was too low. But the bioavailability in humans is quite sufficient. These medications work very well. They don't help everybody. They have toxicities. They have side effects. But in general, they've helped many, many, many hundreds of thousands of people. And animal experimentation would have prevented them from reaching the market, just as it would have prevented penicillin from reaching the market.
Wow. So I would imagine if all of this focus is going to vivisection, is there something more effective that's being blocked from becoming mainstream? Is there something more effective that we should be putting this money and research towards?
There are many so-called alternatives, which is not a word I like, because alternative means that you are substituting one thing for another bad thing. These are really improvements. They're not alternatives. And they've been around for decades and decades, but they're being refined now technologically so that you have things like liver on a chip, lung on a chip, various organs on the chip. Pretty soon they're going to have the entire human body on a chip. And the Weiss Institute, I think it's in New England, is working on that. But there's also in vitro or test tube and petri dish research. There's epidemiological research. There's human clinical research, which, by the way, has been going on for some time in this very area of early traumas that children experience. There are autopsies. There's mathematical modeling, computer modeling. There's tons of stuff. The problem is that these improvements to animal experimentation are not sufficiently funded because the animal experimentation lobby is very strong, very, very, very strong, and they eat up most of the money. I think if over the last 30 years a real concerted effort would have been made to fund these improvements, we wouldn't have any more animal testing or animal experimentation. But the people who know animal experimentation, that's all they know. Mm-hmm. And they hold on, and it's going to require them to be replaced by a new generation of technologically savvy experimenters who can take this 150-year-old methodology, which should be on a par with alchemy and astrology as far as scientific accuracy, and put it in the dustbin of history where it belongs.
Yeah. I've even heard that I forget where I've heard this or what reference to cite here, but I've heard that, like, when polled, most scientists and researchers all agree that animal testing is completely ineffective, and yet when asked whether they should give it up, there was like, but what would we do?
I'm not familiar.
A lot of them know from data that 90% of drugs tested on animals don't work out in humans, and they know that from other data sources that it doesn't work. They also are dimly aware that there are replacements, but they really don't educate themselves about it. They're not encouraged to by their professional organizations. If they utter a word about alternatives or improvements, they get nasty letters. I know this because I've gotten nasty letters, mm-hmm. and I know people who wanted to help in this cause, well-known surgeons, etc., who as soon as it came out that they were helping, they got nasty letters from their dean. You say one more word about this, you're toast. Mm-hmm. And so it's a very, very tight fraternity. It's not as tight as it was 30 years ago when I first started in this, but it's still tight. 30 years from now, I'm hoping we'll have a new population of people. The point is that, number one, the whole concept of alternatives or improvements is relatively new to people. Number two, they're somewhat difficult to understand. Animal testing is simple. You take an animal, you tie it down, you cut it open, you inject it, and you see the results. Whereas these alternative improvements are harder to understand. People aren't educated about them. People aren't even allowed to mention them, but they are being developed, and they will eventually replace both animal experimentation and animal research. In my lifetime, no. In Rick's lifetime, maybe.
Rick, could you possibly tell me a bit about what is going on in Madison and perhaps around the country elsewhere? What are activists doing about this problem?
Right. So, there's a couple things going on. Right now, there's a change.org petition that now has received, 220,000 signatures. People on that list are being urged to contact the president of the system, the president of the UW system, whose name leaves me at the moment. He's
Price.
I'm sorry.
Price. Ray Price.
Oh, it's a Ray Price.
I think so. And also Chancellor Blank.
Right, Blank. So Blank is the chancellor of the UW system, and she probably has the power to stop it as well. But because she's sort of part of the club at UW-Madison, it's probably unlikely that she's going to intervene. I think there's a chance that the president of the system could. I think it's unlikely. If a high donor, if one of the people that has really gives a lot of money to the university, if they were to find out about this and become alarmed, they actually could stop it by saying that they were going to withhold their annual $1 million donation or something. But it's the average person. It's really tough to know what to do. They should sign, of course, the Change.org petition. They should inform themselves. They should go to the Not in Our Name website, which I suppose you'll put on the podcast someplace, to learn so that they can be informed about the details and know what they're talking about if they talk to their friends. But this is a problem about what people can do, and I think that if you get involved in almost any issue, it's really hard for a single individual without really good connections to make much change in our system, just because of the corporations and the large power that government has. The other thing is that most people that you talk to are probably not going to believe you when you talk about the problems, because the authorities, the people that they believe to be the experts in the area, the university itself, university scientists, people in government, they're going to say, no, this is all good. And many people are just going to simply believe that because they have a hard time with independent thinking, and they tend to believe authority figures that tell them what to do. So here locally, people are trying to write letters to the editors. They're posting things on Facebook, on their personal blogs. They're writing letters. They're asking other people to sign petitions. That's really about the only thing that somebody can do.
Do you have the address for people to the website for people to get onto, Ben?
Yeah, actually, there's a site that you mentioned for me, and I'll include the link here in the show notes. But to keep it really simple, I think we thought it would be best to have this one website people can check out that will link them to all the actions they can take. But that site is allanimals.org/maternal-deprivation.html. And there are links to things that you can do if you are an alum of University of Wisconsin, things you can do if you live in Dane County, and things you can do if you meet neither of those criteria.
Can you say that again, Ben, please?
Yeah.
The website, that is.
Yeah, the website is allanimals.org/maternal-deprivation.html.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think one of the most effective, in my opinion, things to say to sort of shoot down any argument pro vivisection is that, and I don't have the stats on this, but as I understand, one of the leading causes of death in our country is actually from pharmacological contraindications, from people being prescribed medicine that ends up not working for them, and there are so many people die of this each year.
Absolutely.
This is actually leading us towards more human loss than any benefit.
Well, I think, though, even if the drug's on the market, there's going to be some people that are going to be misprescribed, and there's going to be adverse effects. We really don't know what the long-term consequences are of many drugs, and until a drug is put into the market where we really have millions of people taking it, there really isn't statistics to tell you whether or not the drug is effective or what its potential negative consequences are. So I think there is a mistake to be made if we try to paint with too broad of a brush that says that animal research is responsible for every bad thing that happens in medicine. It's not. It certainly is responsible for many bad things that happen in medicine, but there's going to be mistakes. Even things that were developed in human patients are going to be misused at times. There's going to be errors. There's going to be all sorts of things that can occur. And so I think we ought not try to – I think that there's enough that we can lay on the table that's just very specific about the harm to the animals, the misleading results that come out of it, the poor quality of care that they have, the money that's involved, the careers based on this, the hard thing it is to change. Without trying to get too global in finding every little thing, the psychiatrist that didn't treat you well when you went into your office, that's not because of animal experimentation. Mm-hmm. It's because that person didn't have the time or the care to give to you.
Mm-hmm. It is, Rick is absolutely right that until a drug is out in the general population, in private practice prescribed by general doctors over a period of time, we're not going to know the ins and outs. And there are many, many examples which I won't even bother to give right now. However, it is also true that clinical research in people of new drugs often requires a 6-week period of time, which is ridiculous. In 6 weeks, you can't learn a lot of the toxicities of drugs. And the reason that one of the reasons that it's so short is that the drug is thought to be safe. Why is it thought to be safe? Because it was safe in monkeys, and it was safe in rats, it was safe in gerbils and hamsters and guinea pigs and rabbits and dogs and cats. So therefore, it must be safe in humans. So therefore, we only need a very short period of time to be used in human experimentation, and that is experimentation, ethical experimentation with informed consent, people volunteering for this work. And the one reason why the length of time is so short is because of the false sense of security that we get from animal testing, that a drug is safe when it turns out not to be safe. If we didn't have this false sense of security, maybe we would expand the period of human clinical testing from 6 weeks to 6 months, and we wouldn't have fen-phen on the market. Mm-hmm. One of the phens being fenfluramine, which passed animal testing and passed the initial short period of human testing, but went on to kill thousands of people from pulmonary hypertension.
Yeah.
Well, here's a crazy thing. Right now, FDA allows phase 1 studies in humans to be done concurrently with animal testing for a new product, a new to the world drug. So that's pretty crazy. Here's another crazy thing if you're looking at just the toxicity side of this and the regulatory stuff. Companies are required to submit data from a rodent and a non-rodent species in their toxicity reports. And usually that's either a dog or a monkey. But what happens is that they're going to give this new chemical to a number of different rat strains, mouse strains, monkeys, and dogs, and other non-rodent species. They're required, though, only to submit the results from 2 studies, a rodent and a non-rodent. What this means is that they can do 20 different toxicity studies and then cherry-pick the data and submit the reports to FDA saying that these 2 species we didn't find any severe toxicology in. Mm-hmm. So the reason that they didn't submit the data on the other studies was because it did hurt them.
And then they have the audacity to say that virtually all progress in human health comes from animal experimentation. Sure, they cherry-pick the results, they can design the experiments to prove whatever they want to, and after they do the human testing, like with spinal cord injury, and the use of prednisolone to treat that. After they do the human testing, they then go back to the animal testing. They find the 1 or 2 or 3% that agrees with what subsequently was found out in the human testing, and they have the audacity to say that animal experimentation led to that treatment. It was really the opposite. The human treatment led to the identification of which animal strain reacted the same way as humans.
That's right. We know it only post hoc.
Right.
Wow.
And it's a known fact that within mice, different strains of mice respond differently. So how can you possibly use the mouse model when there's no such thing as the mouse? There's strain A, strain B, strain C, even in humans, you give a drug to 20 different people, you'll get 20 different responses. Some will be helped, some will be hurt. Some will live longer, some will be killed. Some will develop a skin rash, some won't. Some will have their hallucinations removed, some won't. The trend now is toward what's called personalized medicine, to identify the drug that will help the person and not cause toxicity in that person. That's called personalized medicine. That is the opposite of vivisection. That is the opposite of the basic philosophy behind animal experimentation. So the direction that human medicine is going in is antithetical to the direction that animal experimentation has always gone in.
I really think that the only way that the mainstream America is going to ever get on board with the idea that that animal experimentation need not continue is to understand that it's actually doing us more harm than good. And I hope that there are some campaigns going on or some sort of efforts on the activist front right now to educate the masses about that. I would love if there were some PETA video or otherwise that could just be like the top 5 smackdown things to say in any conversation with someone about vivisection and why it needs to be abolished. Could we come up with that on the spot? Just like the top 5 things to say in a conversation with the average person to just squash any conversation about vivisection. And then maybe we'll make this into a video.
I don't know what the top 5 things are. What I found is that everybody you talk with is moved by something different. Mm-hmm. Your top 5 isn't going to be mine and isn't going to be my neighbors, and it's just everything. Some people only want to hear, they're moved by the money waste. Some people are moved by the cruelty to the animals. People are moved by the dangerous drugs that get onto the market, the pharmaceuticals and the government's backroom dealings, the crazy costs that are involved. I mean, there's everything. There's just so many things that are going to appeal to different people for different reasons. We're not all the same.
Yeah. Murray, any conversation squashers here?
Well, Rick is right. I mean, there are economic criticisms, ethical criticisms, scientific criticisms, medical criticisms, and people will be moved by different things. Mm-hmm. One thing of interest is the war on cancer, which was animal experimentation based. 30 years, war on cancer, animal experimentation taking place all over the country, funded massively by NIH. Results? Zero. Zero drugs, zero treatments, zero cures. Cancer rates the same, cancer mortality the same, maybe going up in certain cancers. The animal experimentation-based war on cancer, which people contributed their hard-earned pennies to, hoping to eradicate cancer, a total and complete failure. Chimpanzees and AIDS. Chimpanzees were in the 80s. They developed what's called a chimpanzee breeding program, where chimpanzees were specifically bred in labs for AIDS experimentation, for AIDS vaccines, and for AIDS chemotherapy. Result? Zero. No vaccines, no therapies. The use of chimpanzees in AIDS research, what did it contribute? Zero. Did it hurt chimpanzees? It ruined their lives. It made them miserable. It robbed us of hard-earned cash, and it impeded proper research, just like use of monkeys in polio research impeded the proper research. It actually impeded the identification of the polio virus, just like smoking research in mice impeded the announcement by the Surgeon General that smoking causes cancer. Why? Because it didn't cause cancer in mice. Mm. Just like cardiovascular research in dogs impedes the correct advice to give to people to prevent cardiovascular disease. Why? Because dogs don't get cardiovascular disease. They eat meat, They eat cholesterol. They have no problem with cholesterol. They have no problem with their coronary arteries. Why? Because they're genetically different. They function differently. So therefore, use of dogs, mainly beagles, in cardiovascular research has impeded the treatment, the prevention and treatment of cardiovascular disease in humans. One can go on and on and on ad infinitum.
Yeah. To summarize, it just sounds like humans are better off just without, even with nothing in place of it. It sounds like we're better off without animal testing.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Wow. Well, we got our work cut out for us trying to get that to become the mainstream notion out there.
We do, but we have many, many hundreds of thousands of activists all around the country, in small towns, in big cities, members of large groups, grassroots people working on their own who are never heard about, never heard from, and yet they are doing amazing work. Mm-hmm. All of this will eventually come together. When, I don't know, but I feel optimistic about it, and I advise everybody listening to this program, do whatever you can. Contact NIH, write letters, write to your local university, write op-eds and editorials opposing animal research for the reasons that Rick and I have given. Don't just sit there and say, they should do something. The they is you.
That sounds like a good closing statement to me.
I was going to say that is a great takeaway here. There's I'm taking a look at the allanimals.org website, and there are many audio files and videos linked here, as well as a whole list of issues where people can read about about everything about animal experimentation and beyond. Would you guys say, is there anything else aside from the site that we've mentioned, which really tells people what they can do about this specific
Yes.
thing?
PETA has recently uncovered horrible videos and pictures of maternal deprivations taking place, funded by NIH, by a researcher who was a student of Harlow, whose name is Suomi, in Maryland. Go to the PETA website, look up their maternal deprivation project, and see the horrible, horrible, horrible pictures and videos of what actually takes place. Don't listen to all the sanitized words that you get from the laboratory. We remove, we peer, raise, blah, blah, blah. All of that is meaningless. Look at the actual pictures and the actual videos that they took that were obtained from them through the Freedom of Information Act. See what they do, how they laugh at the animals who are suffering, how they abuse these animals for no reason whatsoever, even though they admit that nothing good can really come of it. Look at the pictures and the videos on the PETA website, the link being PETA Maternal Deprivation Studies, and see for yourself what actually takes place in those laboratories.
Excellent. I've actually got that link here in front of me. Basically, if people Google PETA Maternal Deprivation Project, it's the first Google search that comes up, but it's investigations.peta.org/NIH-baby-monkey-experiments. And yeah, at that site you can see videos of the actual footage from the university that they didn't want to get out. And what I love is towards the bottom of the page, there is a whole article titled Bad Science that says exactly what I was looking for earlier. It tells people exactly why this is not effective.
And just from my point of view, I think I don't care whether it's effective.
Yeah.
So if it was effective to catch you and put you in a cage and experiment on you to find a cure for my daughter's cancer, I don't have children, but if I did, I would say I would be against that.
Yeah.
I don't care whether it's effective. It's the fact that it isn't effective is a handy thing to be able to pull out of my sack, but it doesn't matter to me. I think that we ought not hurt each other. We shouldn't be mean to each other. We shouldn't be cruel. And
as a medical professional, I am obliged to have an opinion as to whether or not it's effective or not. I spent years working in a group called the Medical Research Modernization Committee, where we analyzed the scientific efficacy of these studies and reported on them, not making any comments on the ethics or the morality of it. But deep down, I am in full agreement with Rick. I don't care if they're effective or not. It is wrong, and if we continue to do it, we are monsters.
Listen, and it's people don't like to hear this, but the Nazis did learn things from experimenting on Jews.
I was just going to make that point. I watched a documentary called Forgiving Dr. Mengele.
Mengele.
Yeah. Where, this woman literally survived. It's a brilliant documentary if you guys get a chance to watch it. Very controversial as well. But this woman who basically was an experiment, was the subject of his experiments. And yeah, there's definitely things that people learn from that, but that just doesn't mean that doesn't make it okay.
That's right. It doesn't make it okay.
Then it all comes down to an argument about speciesism. Why is it okay? One argument that I love is, if these animals are so similar to us psychologically, why would it be okay to put them through something they wouldn't put us through?
So it's not, but it's important to know that this really is part of a chain of events. So there was a time when only only kings had rights. Then it was only men that owned property that had rights. And over time, we've stepped back a couple of times, but there has been a progression of ever larger groups and smaller groups being brought into the rights holders. And so the animal rights movement is just a step in this very large progression that says that every sentient being has the right to live its life without undue interference from others. And so whether you were a woman who didn't have a vote, you were a black person that was kept in chains, you were a minority person in Germany that was treated horribly, whatever it is, over time, now gays and lesbians, over time, there's an our circle of concern is growing. And so that's what gives me hope, is that people that in the past have been just treated, as the saying always is, they were treated like animals. That's true, they were. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And we're still treating some of us as animals because they are animals. Yeah. And what we have to realize is just because we're all animals, aren't we? But just because you're a member of a different species, it doesn't all of a sudden mean that your pain and fear doesn't matter. We used to say that was true for all these other racial groups and all sorts of different people. But we don't say those.
The point is that even though the term animal rights evokes chuckles on the part of certain people, back in the day, black rights, women's rights, children's rights, gay rights, the rights of disabled, all evoke the same chuckles.
Yeah.
And yet now we consider these to be the way things should be. In other words, to paraphrase the Chinese fortune cookie, the philosophy of one generation is the common sense of the next.
Yeah. First they ignore
we take all of these things for granted now, and someday animal rights will be in that same class of human rights, gay rights, black rights, Jews' rights, women's rights, animal rights. Ultimately, there is no difference.
Mm-hmm.
One freedom, one fight.
Yeah, amen. Amen. Okay. Well, guys, I think that's a great place to close. I can't thank you enough for bringing all of this to light and just for everything that you're both doing to really bring this to the forefront. It's much appreciated from this vegan here.
Well, thanks for having us on.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you, Ben.
Absolutely. Thanks again, you guys. Murry Cohen and Rick Bogle, thanks again for taking the time to come on Big Fat Vegan Radio and share this information with our listeners. Also, a huge thank you to Sara Andrews, Big Fat Vegan Radio listener, for bringing this issue to my attention and for all of her hard work coordinating this interview for us and putting everything together so that we could have this conversation. We are going to list some links in the show notes where you can learn more, where you can take action. And also, Sara brought to my attention a website, primatesinc.com, where you can donate to help primates that are retired from research in hopes of providing them with sanctuary after they are retired from all this cruelty. It's been a day of thinking about all the awful things that we're doing to non-human animals in our name, and I've got hope. I've got hope that one of these days we will outgrow this childish, selfish, speciesist way of thinking. So, in the meantime, just to remind you guys, you can always call us at 315-VEGAN-01. That's 315-834-2601. And you can email us at bigfatveganradio@gmail.com. We would love to have you guys become members. You can go to bigfatveganradio.com and click on support for a list of ways that you can help us, some that even don't cost anything. We now have posters, color and black and white, that you can download and print out. Just take them to your local coffee shop, have some copies made, and put them up around campus, and on your local, call board or community board at your local coffee shop or wherever you think people might be interested in hearing about our podcast. You can also donate your account so that we can post statuses and tweets through your Twitter and Facebook, which really helps us, doesn't cost anything, and you can cancel whenever you like. And of course, it's awesome if you guys can become a member, and you get excellent perks and benefits like secret shows and movie nights and Google Hangouts with me and Laura. Also follow Laura and myself on Twitter and Instagram as individuals. I am at Honey LaBronx. Laura is at Lara Yaz, Larayaz. You can also check out Laura's YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/Lara Yaz. And you can check out Honey LaBronx's Vegan Drag Queen Cooking Show at vegandragqueen.com. Also, while you're at it, you might like to buy some of Honey LaBronx's famous medieval oil at medievaloil.com. And as always, shout out to our good friends Michael Herron for our intro and theme song. You can find him and his work at michaelherron.com. And just a quick aside about Michael, he has an album release coming up. He is going to be, let me see if I can get the date for you guys. I believe it's October 14th. Let me see when his, Michael, where is your thing? I'm just going to Google Michael Herron album release because he's that big and fancy now. So that is going to be our special release concert at Dixon Place on Tuesday, October 14th at 7:30. Tickets are $12 in advance or $15 at the door. There is a student discount and a senior discount. So yeah, I will definitely be there. You don't want to miss it. It's a really awesome show he'll be doing, and you can just show him the support for all the awesome work he does as an animal rights activist and musician. And as always, to Kelly Huffine for our logo and cartoon. You can check out her work at kelly42fox.deviantart.com. And as always, we'd like to thank our intern, Madison Marie, for all the hard work that she does. And just one last quick shameless plug for myself. Honey LaBronx hosts her drag show, Titties, with her drag sister, Ms. Cracker, the second and third Wednesday of each month at R Bar, that's the letter R, Bar, at 218 Bowery. So you can check those gigs out, as well as vegan karaoke, aka drag karaoke, with Honey LaBronx at Baby Grand, which is the last Monday of every month at 8:30. So you can just check out my gigs at honeylabronx.com. And that is all we've got for today's episode. Please subscribe to us through iTunes or your podcatcher of choice. And if you could take the time to go to the iTunes music store if you haven't already, and give us an awesome rating and review, preferably 5 stars if you feel so compelled. Especially because iTunes is redoing the way that the podcast app is distributed. It's now standard installed on iPhones and iPods. So, especially if we start getting some awesome reviews and ratings now, it could help put us on the main page of iTunes Music Store again, as we were featured 2 years ago. And that would just help. That helps a lot of new people find us. So that's pretty much it. And in addition to all of that, if you could also do us a favor, this would be a personal favor from me, and I know the animals would thank you if you could find the time, in your busy schedule, just to, not today. You don't have to do it today. You don't even have to do it tomorrow, but just at some point, if you haven't already, you could go vegan!